Committee meeting this July 21st, a beautiful day. Roll call, please.
Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Greenspan. Here. Mr. Germana.
Here.
Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Public comment related to the agenda.
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
In your packet, you have the minutes of July 7th, and if they're in order, I'll accept the motion.
Move to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Resolution 215-0140.
Resolution number 2015-0140, a resolution authorizing an amendment to contract number CE 1100151 with Ohio Guidestone for community-based treatment center management services for the period 1/1/2011 through 6/30/2015 to extend the time period to 6/30/2016 and for additional funds in the amount not to exceed $1,153,828.80, authorizing the county executive to execute the amendment and all other documents consistent with this resolution and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Can I just interject about that last vote?
Absolutely.
Recuse on that. I think we need to change earliers too. Okay. Because I wasn't here. You filled in for me July 7th.
That's okay.
I was sick.
Very good. Thank you. Long time.
Yes, it has been.
Is that good or bad?
I would say I've missed you.
I like that.
Well, there's
lot.
always somewhere in the world there's a big lie of the day, and I think we've just witnessed
Sincerity. That is with all due sincerity.
it. But I do that I do that in jest. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Karen Littman with Juvenile Court. This item is our community-based treatment center with Ohio Guidestone. This is funded out of our targeted reclaim fund. So we come back every year because the funds are state grant funded. So every year when we get the new pot of state grant funds, we come to add the next year's funding to this program. If you remember, this is a cognitive behavioral treatment center for 12 boys. And the targeted reclaim program is created to really help us deter kids from Department of Youth Services placement. So the boys that go to this program, by and large, they're all felons, and they, by and large, if not for this program, would probably be going to the Department of Youth Services.
Okay. Questions? How has that been going? I mean, is there a way in which we can track these folks?
Yeah, it's actually been going well, and as you said that, I realized I brought my data on everything else but that program, so I'm happy to share that with you because we certainly have a lot of data.
If you could get that would be helpful because while it's a big figure, if any program that works, when it comes to that, in the end, as it trickles down, it makes sense for us as we go forward. So.
Right, and it is a good program, and the other piece that it does is it helps us from sending kids to the Department of Youth Services. So the commitments that we make to the Department of Youth Services then adds to our bed days and our commitment number, and the number of bed days that we use annually then is part of our variable that goes into our Reclaim Ohio grant. So by keeping the number of youth that are going to DYS down, it helps us maintain money coming in through the Reclaim Ohio grant.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Ma'am?
And we put the money up front, correct? And then we're reimbursed by the state?
No, the state actually sends us, the way it works is that we get the state for reclaim and targeted reclaim, they give us checks 3 times a year. So there's youth services, there's reclaim, and there's targeted reclaim. So in July, we get our entire youth services grant, and we get 1/3 of the variable. In January, we get 1/3 of the variable and the entire targeted reclaim pot. And then in May-June, we get the last third of the variable.
You said youth reclaim. What was
Youth,
the second one?
youth services, which is the same amount we get. That's based on population, so that amount only changes every 10 years. So that's the youth services grant. The variable is sort of what we call Reclaim Ohio. We sort of use that term in the broader sense, but that has to do on a formula, so that changes all the time. And it actually, one of the reasons they cut it into thirds is because that number actually will change and go up and down as they figure the number of bed days out. And then the targeted reclaim is the same amount every year, and then we get that, and that's for only specific programs that are approved by the University of Cincinnati. It's for felony level youth only, and those programs are really, they call it targeted because they're to keep youth out of the Department of Youth Services.
Okay, and I guess the final question would be, do you visit or some staff and visit down there to keep up if the state was to pull out and say we don't want to do this anymore? Are you on some kind of committee or something like that?
You mean at the state level?
Yeah, at the state level.
Right. So we have quarterly meetings for targeted reclaim. Plus, we've got 3 times a year there are reclaim meetings. So Cuyahoga County is very active in sort of a lot of the programming that's going on there. And then they have these ad hoc committees, which we always are volunteering for to be on. So, and those are sort of as needed. So when they're redoing different parts of the program or looking at the formula or whatever. So we try to get ourselves on those subcommittees as well.
Okay, so we know firsthand if there's going to be some changes.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you.
Anything further? And I see on the dates that we need to move this forward.
Yes, we do.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll accept a motion for Resolution 2015-0140 to the full council for second reading under suspension. Do I have a second? And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. 2015-0141.
Resolution number 2015-0141, a resolution authorizing an amendment to master contract number CE 1500026 for traditional residential treatment services for the period 2/1/2015 through 1/31/2017 to change the total amount not to exceed from $1,400,000 to $3,571,147.73 to authorize funding decreases and/or increases with various previously approved providers to terminate contract number CE 1500026 with the House of Emmanuel effective 6/2/2015 and to make awards on RQ 32933 to additional providers for the period 6/9/2015 through 1/31/2017, authorizing the county executive to execute the amendment and all other documents consistent with this resolution and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Okay, Karen Littman again with Juvenile Court. So this one requires a story to sort of explain because there's like a lot of different pieces to this. So the court did a request for proposal process for our residential treatment program in general, and this was back in 2014. And from that, we had a master contract, which council approved in January. And that was for $1.4 million. Right prior to that, in the budget conversations, council awarded or allocated $1.5 million additional dollars to our residential program. But since we already had that master contract sort of in the pipeline for approval, we didn't have those dollars encumbered to that contract at that time. At the same time, we noticed that in our array of providers is that we had a real significant hole in that we did not have a local provider who provides sex offender treatment locally in a residential setting. So we then released another RFP for sort of a very narrow focus of residential treatment that we needed. So then we from that point, were ready to then amend the original master agreement to include these new vendors who offer the second RFP process, as well as add that $1.5 million onto the encumbrance. As we went through that amendment process, one of the vendors who was originally had responded to the RFP and was part of the original master contract was unable to show any workers' comp insurance or any liability insurance and really didn't want to sign the agreement anymore. So we decided to terminate that. We didn't have any youth there. We haven't had any youth there in a long time. So we are terminating that agreement, and that's with the House of Emmanuel facility. So what we're doing here is we're terminating that. We're adding the new vendors on, and then we're adding this additional money, which is actually 2 pieces. So it's the $1.5 million that came out of the budget process last year, plus Our YFCP program, we decreased that by $750,000, and we're putting that $750,000 into this part of the master agreement. So that's the story.
You're busy on that one.
Yes.
Mr. Greenspan.
Could you just restate what you said, the 750,000?
So we have two residential master agreements. One's for what we call traditional residential, and one is the Youth and Family Community Partnership Program. So we, and both have the same, are on the same timetable. So they both had a February 1st start of this year. What we did was we did an amendment to that to decrease that total amount that was on that contract by $750,000 because the spending on traditional residential was running a lot higher than it was on the Youth and Family Community Partnership Program. So we decided to take from the one residential program and put those dollars in the other residential program. So we did an amendment to the YFCP to decrease it by that much, and now we're putting those dollars into this one.
Thank you.
Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Carrington Youth Academy said in the amount of $0. So what do we do there? They were funded prior to this, or
No, so in the master agreement, you take the total amount of money and you, what I call, assign it to different vendors. So you assign them different amounts of money. The beauty of the master agreement is that as you send youth to one program and not another, you can, through a decertification, recertification process, very easily move it from vendor A to vendor B. Prior to this, we used to have each of these vendors had their own contract, so every time somebody was spending high, we had to amend, and it was a hugely cumbersome process. So the fact that Carrington may say they're adding $0 may mean that there's already enough money encumbered onto that agreement right now, but then if we were to send a number of youth there, we just would sort of move it over and to cover those invoices. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Also time?
Yes, please.
So if everybody's okay with that, Resolution 2015-0141, recommendation for second reading under suspension. I'll accept a motion.
So, second.
First and seconded. All in favor? Against? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I look forward to coming
Somewhat
back.
complicated, but you explained that so well. It was easy to follow.
Oh, thank you. All right.
Okay. Under discussion, we have an update from Dr. Gilson, medical examiner. Doctor, we brought you in because of the recent headlines, unfortunately. I know you have a handle on it, but I thought if you could give us an update as to what happened.
Thanks. And I thank you, Chairman and members of Council, for the opportunity to address this. I prepared some remarks that I hope aren't too long, but it's a complicated topic, and I would certainly like to just go through this and welcome questions after that. When I was asked to come here, the topic was an update on testing procedures in the laboratory. I would like to say that I believe the laboratory still provides high-quality, accurate, scientifically valid results with the almost 40 employees that I have there, and that what I'm going to describe to you I think is an aberration. It's a concern to me deeply. It should be a concern to anybody who realizes how much our justice system relies on honest scientific results. My first question to answer, I think, is how did this come to light that we found this individual? We received a specimen for testing from the Cleveland Police Department in April for drug testing. A report was returned to the submitting agency, and a complaint was received from the submitting agency that the results were negative when in fact they thought that there had been cocaine present in this specimen. As part of our quality assurance policy, when we receive such a complaint, that testing is performed by our drug chemistry supervisor. When he had the original specimen returned and examined it, he realized that it had been inadequately sampled. By that I mean that the specimen contained powder as well as rocks, and it should have been sampled for both of those components, the powder and the rocks, but the way it had been sampled was just with the powder, which tested as baking soda, and the rocks were not appropriately tested. When they were retested, they had been not tested originally, they tested positive for cocaine, which confirmed the submitting agency detective's suspicion. An amended report was submitted at that point. We immediately notified them of the change verbally, and the chemist was immediately removed from casework pending review of his material. I'll address further in these remarks a previous issue we had with this chemist in 2011 about inadequate retesting of a specimen. We did an initial review of his work and identified in very short order that there were other issues regarding sampling and protocol breaks. He was placed on administrative leave pending discipline and subsequently terminated. He did no casework after we were aware of this problem. To date, we've done a 6-month look back of his material, which includes 673 submitted seized drug cases. We found that 4 of them had inadequate sampling, and 23 of them showed inadequate protocol regarding packaging. The packaging in this case would be if we have a specimen of drug, heroin, cocaine, under 5 grams, and it comes in rock form, we're obligated by testing standards to test one of those rocks, pull out the rock that was tested, package it separately, and return the original specimen back to the submitting agency. What he had failed to do, and which is a break in protocol, is to take the tested rock, separate it from the rest of the body, and then submit back. He just lumped everything back together and sent it back. These may seem like trivial things, but these protocols are in place to ensure integrity of testing and to set up the potential for subsequent retesting of material as necessary. They're not in place for trivial reasons. I would add that of these 673 cases, 95% of this individual's work was appropriate. The number of packaging problems is less than 5%. The number of sampling problems is less than 1%. But this isn't the kind of place where that's an acceptable standard of performance. He's breaking protocol in a significant number of cases and was appropriately terminated. I'd like to move to how this happened, what we're doing about it. Our quality assurance procedures are really designed to catch problems with testing. That said, I fundamentally differ between problems with testing because of poor practice and problems with testing generated by dishonesty. And I lump this instance into a practice of dishonesty. What we do as part of our quality assurance, the first thing I mentioned is when we get customer complaints or requests, the supervisor will retest it. That is how we caught this individual's work. Other than that, the laboratory has a policy where the supervisor does a 100% paper case review. He would not have been able, without directly visualizing these specimens, to know that there were shortcuts being taken. Again, the shortcuts are dishonest. They're not a problem with him not knowing what to do. They're dishonest. The solution that we put in place as a result of this incident is that we are now going to have cameras in our drug chemistry unit to photograph every specimen, both as it's received and as it's packaged out to return to the agency, so that we're not fooled by people. We don't visualize their work and they're cutting corners on it. The second breakdown that I see is that we couldn't detect the inadequate sampling because the language of the reports was vague. Had this individual accurately described in detail the specimens he was analyzing, it would have prompted the supervisor to question the amount of testing he was doing. I'll give a specific example to clarify. Instead of describing powder and a number of rocks in a specimen, he would describe a solid white substance of a certain weight and leave it at that and say that he had sampled it, which would be appropriate if it was all powder or if it was a rock or something like that. So again, I think this individual was clever enough to circumvent things through dishonesty, and he wasn't practicing bad science, he was practicing dishonest science. The other situation that we had in place prior to any of this is what we call blind proficiency testing. So our laboratory will take known samples, submit those back to primarily the sheriff's office for them to be resubmitted to our agency for the purpose of retesting as a check on the laboratory workers that they're not cutting corners. This is really the only proficiency testing type that we can do to catch dishonest practice consistently. I'd have to say that we do this on a limited number of cases, probably a couple per analyst per year. We're going to expand the number of tests that we do that way and the type of tests we do that way. I can say that if we had tested this individual and 95% of his work appeared appropriate, it still would have taken time to find him. He was caught by a QA process, but I don't think it's realistic to think that sometimes these things are caught overnight. Additional responses that we took when this came to light were to identify county council, county executive, the county prosecutor, and municipal prosecutors, as well as the county police chiefs and the courts, on anybody who could have been impacted by this. We notified our accrediting body, the American Society of Crime Lab Directors, of a nonconformance, their terminology. And I personally spoke with my assistant laboratory director, with the executive director of ASCLD, to inform them of what we were doing and to let them know, that this was going on. They said that we should investigate and submit a report of our investigation by October. We vetted our preliminary strategy with them to their satisfaction and would certainly abide by any additional requests they make when our report is submitted in October. That strategy involves the continued review of this chemist's work back to January of 2013. We anticipate a need to physically re-examine approximately 100 cases a year based on vague language that I mentioned, this solid white substance versus a more descriptive terminology. Based on that examination, we will perform repeat testing as appropriate. After we've taken out that part of the individual's work off the table, we're going to conduct random re-examinations of other casework to at least 10% of all of these other remaining cases. 10% review is a standard quality assurance protocol, and it was deemed acceptable in our conversation with the executive director of the Crime Lab accrediting body. We will retest also any specimen prior to its going to trial. As I mentioned, we will submit a report to our accrediting body in October. Copies of that report will be sent to county council, to county executive, to county and local prosecutors, and all police chiefs. We've also responded, I believe, very transparently to media requests about this topic. At that time, they will also receive a copy of our report. Other than the index case, the one that brought this individual's behavior to light, there has been no report required for final amendment based on subsequent retesting. This individual cut corners. He was clever what he cut corners on. And when we went back and retested those 22 cases, as well as the 4 that were inadequately sampled, the only problem case that we identified was the one where he didn't test the rocks that had the cocaine, but he tested the powder that did not. I say that because one of the things that concerns me most about this kind of behavior is that somebody winds up in jail unjustly. So far as we know, that has not happened. That's part of the real purpose why we're going back to test these things as far as we are, and we're looking essentially for when this pattern emerges in his behavior. If it emerges or we don't see, it stopping back to January 2013, we will go back as far as we have to be certain that we've identified this individual's lapses and to make a transparent attempt to remedy any situation he's created, especially those individuals who are unjustly accused. As I say, to date, we have not identified that, and what I think his shortcuts were doing were basically just not calling something positive in one case and inadequately testing something which subsequent testing confirmed his false record of. I think the other question that I would ask is, why, when we had this individual in 2011 doing inadequate testing, how did he fool us? We did consider termination at that time. He was given a second chance based on some other factors that came into play. That's my final decision. I don't expect any discipline for anybody in the supervisory chain of command other than myself. I made that decision. It's my responsibility. I'm the head of the laboratory. He was monitored after the second chance through 2012 with progressively less monitoring, but intensive monitoring for a 6-month period afterwards, during which time we identified no issues with his work. I really regret the impact this has on the public's trust of our laboratory and on the honest people who work there. It's not a unique story in forensics. I can cite enough laboratories that I'm not proud of outside of our community that have had similar problems. We made a mistake, and I think the best we can do is learn from it, and I surely intend to. I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
So as far as you know, what he came up with was the one false negative, so there weren't any false positives that we know of.
Based on the testing we've done back through the December, the other testing's ongoing. To date, no, we haven't identified anybody who's been wrongly accused of via false positive result being reported. If I see that, that's one of the things I'm going to bring to the prosecutor's attention right away, because I think that rises to the level of criminal fraud.
Right.
Whereas in this case, I think this is a disciplinary matter based on unacceptable work practice currently.
Hopefully that's where it'll stay. Any questions? Any questions? Well, thank you very much. It was a better explanation than what the plain dealer usually gives you. They just give you the blurb. And I knew there was a lot more behind it, and I thought it important for, you know, us and our viewers to hear the whole story. So I appreciate that, Doctor. Mr. Germana.
I was trying to follow all that.
Somewhat complicated, I agree.
What I didn't understand is what was the motivation for, what was this operator's or tester's motivation to cut corners?
He's cutting corners, yeah.
So it was less work?
Less work.
He
I don't really know how much time
he wasn't
really
trying
saved
to
himself.
influence cases. It was
No,
just at
no,
random.
I share that concern a lot more than, well, I don't want to downplay what he did. What he did is just fundamentally dishonest, but I think it was more out of cutting corners to do less work than to influence decisions or charging or those kind of things.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate
I'd like
it.
to request, if I could, that we come back in October when the report's released to answer
Absolutely.
any questions at that time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll probably have you in here anyhow. We got the budget coming up, so we'll be
We
seeing.
won't mix those two.
Yeah, we won't mix those two.
Fair enough. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, miscellaneous business? Other public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
We're adjourned.